Hello again. It's time to rock and roll with Doug, the 2-Minute Gardener. How to landscape with rocks. Because unlike plants, rocks never die. They just get recycled and then get dumped in your driveway mere feet away from an expensive Mercedes Benz, but this guy is a professional and was able to dump it without hitting the Mercedes. All right, let's look at about a dozen ways to use rocks in your landscape. Number one, and one I've talked about several times, is a dry stream bed. Now, the nice thing about a dry stream bed is it serves multiple purposes. One, it's visually interesting to look at as a focal point. Two, it serves as an actual drainage corridor to kind of move water from one point to another point in the wet season, and then when it's the dry season, it's interesting aesthetic. And yes, this is kind of a southwest garden kind of aesthetic, but you can also do kind of ornamental dry stream beds, like this little itty bitty gray one. It's not a really functional dry stream bed, but it's just kind of a visually interesting way to have a low maintenance succulent garden. Or stick it in the middle of some artificial turf like this guy did. Another way to use rocks in your landscape is you can use them as accent points. For example, around this particular pool. Now, I didn't do the pool, but I did do the Flagstone patio, and we decided to incorporate all these boulders into the patio itself. So while we're on the subject, let's talk about flagstone. So flagstone is a wonderful natural stone material that you can use for pool decks, patios, all kinds of fun things, even pathways, as you see as we wind around. And by the way, it was raining on the day I shot this. These aren't naturally shiny flagstone pieces. It just happened to be raining, and I just kept on shooting. But flagstone is a really interesting material because, as you can see here, it gives you lots of different color variations. It's much more interesting than just, say, concrete. Another way you can use rocks are those little retaining walls. So we had these boulders, and we actually brought in boulders, and we can stack them up to use the retaining wall. Now, at the pool, we just had a simple layer one. This one was a backyard that had very, very little space, and they wanted a really organic-looking retaining wall. So we used those boulders to create a wonderful retaining wall. Another very obvious way to use rocks in your landscape is a water feature. Some big ones, some little ones. A really nice natural way to use water. I always recommend a pondless water feature, but if you have the space, use a big old pond. Do a big pond, throw some fish in there. It's really kind of a fun way to create a wonderful inviting space for wildlife in your backyard. By the way, hit that like button if you are enjoying this little video on how to rock and roll in your garden. All right, moving on. Once we get past this lovely pond, decomposed granite patios and pathways. So decomposed granite comes in basically two forms: fine, like you see in this patio, and very natural, organic, and then there's crushed, which is a little looser and more crunchy as you walk underneath it. If you're going to do fine decomposed granite, like you see there, you want to make sure to put stabilizers on it to make it really nice and hard. Loose, or even looser, like this gravel between the flagstone, you definitely want to maybe throw a little epoxy in there to kind of give it some stability. Another way to rock and roll that I saw over here at Southwest Boulder and Stone, big rock yard, all kinds of cool things up there, are these custom stone water features. Now this is definitely a more artistic way, but look at the veination of those rocks. It's just gorgeous. The work they do up there is just fabulous. But you can find these all over the country. Really creative use to make it an artistic water fountain. And really, your imagination is the only thing limiting you as the kind of water fountain you can use. You find a cool piece of rock and you just start drilling and cutting and doing something, or letting the craftsman do it. Bore a little hole for the water to come up and around, and it creates a really visually interesting centerpiece. Help your garden pop, as I mentioned in last week's video on things to help your garden pop. This is definitely one of those things that make a garden pop because of all the cool colorations. But even a plain boring gray rock, you can bore a hole and do something like that into it. So really kind of a neat way to use rocks to kind of make that garden pop in all kinds of interesting ways. I just love these water fountains. I think they're just so fascinating. Another way you can just use rocks, and this is more commonly when you're excavating a landscape and you just find the rocks, just shuffle them around, move them, and use them to accent some of the landscape. Make sure when you do that you want to bury those rocks a little bit so they look like they were naturally discovered. Another way, a very common way, is rock mulch. You can use either fine rock or big rock. The nice thing about rock mulch is that it's never going to break down. You're never going to have to replace it. It's really sturdy. Some rock mulch is fairly affordable, like this Arizona cobble, which comes in about $90 a ton. Others can get up to $500 a ton, so you want to do smaller landscapes. But especially if you're doing Southwest gardens, consider using some rock mulch as an accent. And then, as we talked about, there's some examples of the really expensive stuff, the $500 a ton stuff. Another way to rock your landscape is just interesting furniture ideas. So you have a bird bath there, a bench here, all kinds of fun cutways. I mentioned earlier pathways. Again, this is a decomposed granite pathway with a little flagstone retaining wall there. Kind of fun, but a very natural, organic way to work from one point to another point. Also, I may point out decomposed granite is half the cost of concrete. So it's affordable if you have a tight budget and you want to create a little pathway. DG is going to come in at about $5 a square foot installed compared to $10 for concrete. Another way is to use these really fancy Mexican beach pebbles as accents for a stepping stone pathway. So here we made some expensive stepping stones out of tile or using flagstone, and then we accent it with the rock or the DG. And here's we're going back to another DG pathway. Well, anyway, that's all the time we have for today. That was a dozen ideas of things you can do with rocks in your landscape. Thank you so much for watching. And again, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to get more of my garden videos. Until next time, this is Doug, the 2-Minute Gardener, saying thanks for watching.